Barack Obama is back in the game after the second of 3 US presidential debates in New York today. After a lacklustre performance in the first matchup with Mitt Romney, the president came out fighting.
While we were still dealing with our diplomats being threatened, Governor Romney put out a press release trying to make political points. And that's not how a commander-in-chief operates. You don't turn national security into a political issue. Certainly not right when it's happening. And not everybody agrees with some of the decisions I've made. But when it comes to our national security, I mean what I say. I said I'd end the war in Libya, in Iraq, and I did.
Governor Romney also delivered a strong performance, continuing to push his advantage as the alternative leader who's not yet a disappointment.
I think you know better. I think you know that these last 4 years haven't been so good as the president just described, and that you don't feel like you're confident that the next 4 years are going to be much better either. I can tell you that if you were to elect President Obama, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get a repeat of the last 4 years.
This debate was close, but many analysts gave President Obama the edge. And 3 flash polls in the hour after the debate also confirmed Obama as the winner. So, Imre Salazinski, has the president got his groove back?
He was certainly more feisty and more the Obama we're used to today. But, you know, Tim, I think in a way Romney only had to turn up at these debates and not have 2 heads, given the, let's face it, degree of demonisation that he's been subjected to in a lot of the media, the suggestions that he's linked with the Tea Party or Sarah Palin or that kind of more extreme wing of the Republican Party. In fact, he's done a lot more than turn up and have only 1 head. I've found him very fluent and confident in these debates, and I think in the wash-up he's going to come out ahead of Obama once we've had the 3 debates. Mind you, personally, I would think that the tightening of the polls is perhaps less due to that first debate than simply the fact that as the election approaches, it gets larger in people's window.
More people engage.
More people engage.
Well, Stephen Long, at the first debate, there was no comment from President Obama about Mitt Romney's wealth, about his comments on the 47% that he probably wouldn't represent. This time there were references to that and to models of vulture capitalism that might have been referring to Bain Capital, for example. So did he do enough, hinting at this, to wound Mitt Romney this time around?
My impression was that he did, and he was far more aggressive. He went for those points and also raised some of the potential contradictions in the policy of Mitt Romney. I thought that he scored well when he raised the trillions of dollars in tax cuts and how that was going to be paid for. And last time he did seem lacklustre, and there were obvious targets that he either chose not to go for strategic reasons that in hindsight may have been ditched or somehow just overlooked. And in political terms, I felt that the performance was much stronger and he kicked some goals. Of course, in America, it's a double-edged sword. You're going to appeal to half the people by attacking vulture capitalism and what have you, but there's a fair constituency that believes that free enterprise is integral in the land of the free.
Whereas Mitt Romney had already been accused of bungling his response to the attack in Benghazi that killed the US ambassador and others. I'd ask whether he bungled his attack on the president on the same subject today. Let's look first at the tape of how that went in the debate.
The suggestion that anybody in my team, whether the Secretary of State, our UN ambassador, anybody on my team would play politics or mislead when we've lost 4 of our own, Governor, is offensive.
You said in the Rose Garden, the day after the attack, it was an act of terror. I want to make sure we get that for the record, because it took the president 14 days before he called the attack in Benghazi an act of terror.
Get the transcript.
He did, in fact, sir. So let me call it an act of terror.
Can you say that a little louder, Candy?
He did call it an act of terror.
So that was really the first misstep by Mitt Romney in these debates. Did that hurt him, do you think?
It's interesting to see how it'll play. In right-wing circles, that whole Benghazi story has been bubbling since it occurred. There's been a lot made of the fact that the State Department downgraded the status of that very consulate there in Benghazi, and it was a decision of Hillary Clinton's office. And there's been a lot of play on that. And the feeling that he didn't come in and slam him on it, I think, will be very, very disappointing to his voters. And it did look like a misstep. He looked uncomfortable. He sat back. He'd made a mistake, because they did call it at the beginning as either a response to that film or an act of terror. It just couldn't be read at that time. And the real allegation is, if it's an act of terror, why weren't you prepared? But he didn't follow through with that.
He wasn't able to, really, because of his mistake in making the claim the President hadn't spoken about it as such. Well, joining us now to pick over the debate, Tom Switzer from the United States Studies Centre. Tom, who won?
I think the general consensus is probably that Barack Obama won by a nose. This was a different president from the one 2 weeks ago, when he was bedevilled by a series of missteps, and Mitt Romney gave him such a hiding you sort of half expected the referee to end the bout on grounds of compassion. This time he was more assertive, more aggressive, as I think we've agreed, and I think he helped boost confidence for his own Democratic and Liberal base.
When you talk about it as a bout, it almost was that, wasn't it? They were almost dancing around each other in the ring rather than stuck behind podiums.
Yeah, they were both very aggressive. I'm not sure how that plays with independents who don't really like partisan politics.
What were the decisive issues today, did you think?
Well, I think the issue of the economy is still front and centre of this campaign. That was the first question asked about jobs. It was a college undergraduate who's worried that he won't find work, like a lot of other college graduates in the course of the last 4 years. And this is really Obama's big weakness. When he became president, he and his advisers made it quite clear that his big spending stimulus package would lead to an unemployment rate of 5.6% or thereabouts. It's still persistently high. It's 7.8%. Of course, the debt level has increased dramatically. So there's a lot of angst in the community, and I think Romney, in a way, has a fairly easy task to highlight that point.
Well, you're talking percentages there. Mitt Romney did something else. He used a figure that I think the first time I heard it used was by Clint Eastwood arguing with an empty chair. But let's have a look at what Mitt Romney did say about unemployment.
The middle class is getting crushed under the policies of a president who has not understood what it takes to get the economy working again. He keeps saying, look, I've created 5 million jobs. That's after losing 5 million jobs. The entire record is such that the unemployment has not been reduced in this country. The unemployment, the number of people who are still looking for work, is still 23 million Americans.
OK, so a lot of critics have said that that is a fudge, that the actual unemployed figure is not 23 million, it's 12.8 million, that there are 8.2 million underemployed people, part-timers who want more work, and 2.5 million who are described as marginally attached to the labour force, which is how I feel sometimes, I think. But, Tom, is that going to come back to haunt him? Because the electorate seems to be actually picking over these little arguments fairly in a detailed way.
Yeah, but it goes both ways. I mean, the fact-checkers are having a field day with President Obama on the question of closing down permits for onshore and offshore drilling. That probably worked to Romney's advantage. On this issue, you're probably right. This worked to Obama's advantage. But the fact is, the unemployment rate is 7.8%, and no president since the war has been re-elected when the unemployment rate is 7.4% or higher, and it is the most sluggish economic recovery since the Great Depression. So the economy is really a bad area for Obama. He's trying to highlight the negatives, or the perceived negatives, in the Romney campaign, most notably that he's Mr. Monopoly Man without the top hat and cane, and that he's a sort of a modern-day Gordon Gekko vulture capitalist. And that does play well with certain voters, particularly a lot of those Reagan Democrats in those seats like Ohio that can really swing an election.
Quite, but as Imre said, he hasn't come across that way, really, has he?
No, I mean, Charles Krauthammer, the distinguished columnist, made the point that all he really needed to do was turn up to these debates without his horns on.
Yeah, well, so Obama did zero in on the wealth, on the 47%, the videotape that he described as not being his constituents, essentially, I guess. And they had a bit of a confrontation when it came to talking about pension plan that again gave Obama the chance to bring that up. Let's have a look at how that played.
Mr. President, have you looked at your pension?
Kenny,
Have you looked at your pension?
I've got to say.
Mr. President, have you looked at your pension?
You know, I don't look at my pension. It's not as big as yours, so it doesn't take as long.
Let me give you some. Let me give you some advice.
I don't check it that often.
Always good if you get the audience laughing, I should imagine, especially after the first performance.
Yeah, indeed. Look, that was a good line. That was all in the context about offshore trade and whatnot, and Mitt Romney having a lot of accounts in China. He made a fairly plausible response. I think all things considered, though, Obama did very well today, given how bad he was 2 weeks ago. That's really the takeout from today's event.
Do we get more unemployment figures before the poll?
Yeah, there'll be one more, and that'll be the October figures.
So how significant do you think that will be? Because the Republicans tried to play down a surprising improvement.
Well, the unemployment rate is trending downwards. But look, the bottom line is it is a very sluggish economy, and most economists acknowledge as much. I mean, the real danger is the threat of going into a double-dip recession, which is quite conceivable if the Americans go off this fiscal cliff.
Is it not somewhat trivial, though, Tom, the way that the debate is framed, as if presidents can create jobs, as if this individual can create jobs? Now, there is a legitimate debate about policy. I would note that that many of the... It's very difficult to judge the Obama plan because so many of the measures were actually blocked in Congress. He didn't have control of Congress. But I find this whole debate and the way it's pitched as if powerful global forces that were not the responsibility of either of these men can somehow be countered so easily. Now, that might be the way that debates are played out politically, but the world of global political economy is a more complex beast.
Well, bear in mind, the first 2 years of the Obama presidency, he did have supermajorities of Democrats in both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and they did pass, obviously, the healthcare provisions, but also the big spending stimulus package, which was supposed to kickstart the American economy. Romney, I think, is on stronger ground when he just looks at the record. So many people are out of work. So in that sense, the president hasn't done much. But look, I'll remind you, in the early 1980s, when there was another deep recession, Ronald Reagan came to the White House, and he put to Congress a series of tax cut measures, and that stimulated the economy. And most economists recognise these were the great boom years of the 1980s attributed to a president's policies.
We could go into a whole debate because there are a lot of counter-arguments on the Reagan tax cuts.
Well, we've done this at university, you're quite right.
Tom, I was trying to think today when the last US president with a business background, and I actually couldn't think of one in my lifetime, which I guess speaks to a deep vein of populism in American cultural life. But, I mean, these seem to be propitious times for perhaps breaking that mould.
Well, look, Romney made those very points today. He highlighted the fact that he had been in business for many years and created a lot of jobs, as well as losing jobs. But he also had been in charge of the Salt Lake City Olympics in 2002. And, of course, he'd been a governor of a Liberal state in Massachusetts, and he worked with Democrats. So he has a pretty good resume on these issues, and I think it might well appeal to a lot of independents. How many, I'm not sure. But, again, it all comes down to those battleground states. We're going to hear so much in the course of the next 3 weeks about these polls. Just think about the polls in Ohio, Florida and Virginia primarily.
But do you think he's successfully contested the centre now with Obama?
I think that Romney obviously did what he had to do to win the nomination, reach out to the hard right of the party, curry favour with the Tea Party specifically. But as a good politician, he knows he has to move to the centre politically in order to attract a lot of those independents and Reagan Democrats who are more socially conservative but economically a bit moist, if you like. I think he's doing everything he can to do that. He's distanced himself from social conservatives on abortion in the last week, and he's also softened his position on tax policy so that he can have a bit of wriggle room to compromise with Congress should he win office.
Has he humanised himself, though?
That's a very good point, Inga. Yeah, I think this is one of his great weaknesses. There's a sense he's not really authentic.
He looks like a cartoon character. I met him when he came to Jerusalem.
Right.
And I was really surprised by how he is exactly like the cartoon character that he looks like on the screen.
Well, he's a very good-looking, handsome man.
Handsome.
65 years of age. I mean, he looks like he's 50.
Yeah, no, he's a handsome cartoon character, but that feeling, I don't know if he's punched through to be a real person for the electorate, not for me.
Well, I think in terms of charisma, you're quite right. President Obama does have it over Mitt Romney, but ultimately I think the people in America are very frustrated with the direction in which they're going, and they're more concerned about getting someone who can get things done, not be charismatic.
There was a very thoughtful profile of him in the New Yorker, which hasn't been friendly towards him, but in this case, Nicholas Lemann, I think, wrote it, said that he's much better and more personable one-on-one than in those sorts of situations. There was much more human.
There was also a very, very good profile of his running mate, Paul Ryan, in the New Yorker, and I'd be interested to see how much they're going to put up the running mate and the rest of the campaign. He has very, very strong views from, I guess, what one might call the Austrian free market school, and some of it sits well with what Romney is arguing, but some of it doesn't sit quite so well.
Yeah, I think in defence of Ryan, though, he has recognised more than, say, President Obama and Mitt Romney that a lot of these entitlement programs, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, are on an unsustainable trajectory. And if they're not reformed, they will go bankrupt in the next 10 to 20 years. And that does touch the nerves of a lot of folks who are about to go into retirement.
Yeah, but politically, someone who opposed stimulus programs for his own constituency, and I just really wonder how much of a good political sell Ryan is.
Well, it's going to focus surely on the presidential candidates. I think this close, though, isn't it, Stephen? Ryan's had his moment in the sun for this.
Back in the box.
In fact, the next thing we're going to see, there was an element of it in today's debate, foreign affairs. None from memory in the first debate. No. In particular, Mitt Romney had some pretty harsh words about China. I thought it was very strong. But can I ask how much interest there'll be when they get to the third debate on foreign affairs? Because some commentators say Americans won't even watch it.
Look, I think Americans are suffering from foreign policy fatigue. You know, they've been bogged down in these two wars in Iraq, it's now ended, and Afghanistan for more than a decade. And I think there's a growing sense among all age groups, all demographics, that nation building, exporting democracy, we've been there, done that, and the time is to reorder priorities. That's why Barack Obama's most popular punchline on the campaign trail is that we need to do some nation building here at home. And it's why Mitt Romney, who champions this American century, only dedicated one paragraph in a 40-minute speech to the Republican Party National Conference. Foreign policy. Quite extraordinary. He didn't even mention the Afghanistan war, so I don't think Americans are tuned into foreign policy. It's primarily about the economy.
And so will we see this being a series of contortions as they try to tie various foreign situations back to the US economy?
That's right, and you saw that today with Mitt Romney when he said that he would label China as a currency manipulator and impose tariffs on them from day one. I don't think he'll do it when he's in office, but nevertheless, that's a way of appealing to a lot of the Rust Belt states who are losing manufacturing jobs to China.
As Hillary Clinton said in those WikiLeaks cables, how do you talk tough to your banker?
There you go.
To China. Tom Switzer, thanks very much
so much
for joining us.